It was the kind of afternoon that looked perfect on a brochure. Blue sky, the smell of cedar trees carried by a gentle breeze, and the hum of distant laughter echoing through the forest canopy. July the 13th, 2019, started like any other warm Saturday at Falls Ridge Preserve, a 2,000-acre state park nestled deep in the Oregon wilderness, popular with day hikers and families from the nearby town of Pine Brush. That day, the Kinley family had driven in 2 SUVs from their home just 40 minutes away. Lauren Kinley, 17, rode in the backseat with her younger cousins, earbuds in, scrolling through pictures on her phone as the car snaked through the tree-lined roads. They arrived shortly before noon and parked at the lower loop of the preserve, a stretch of land that offered wide picnic clearings near a gently flowing creek and a shaded trail system that wound deep into the woods. The Kinleys, like many others, had reserved table number 9 weeks in advance. It was one of the most coveted spots, close to the restrooms, just a few hundred feet from the parking lot and near the footpath to the overlook. It was quiet, peaceful, and, on that particular day, absolutely normal. Lauren was in a good mood, according to her mother, Julia. She helped unload bags of snacks, laid out a blanket near the tree line, and even took a few group photos with her cousins and aunt. A few of them mentioned she'd been quieter than usual, but not in a way that set off alarms. She wasn't sulking, she just seemed content to observe. At around 1:15 p.m., after lunch had mostly wrapped up and people were wandering between games of frisbee and creek dipping, Lauren reportedly told her brother Kyle she was going to use the restroom. It was a short walk, visible from where they sat if you stood and looked directly toward the trail. Kyle nodded, barely registering the exchange. Lauren walked off, leaving her phone on the table beside her half-finished lemonade. She didn't take her wallet either. It was still tucked inside the blue drawstring bag she'd brought from home. No one thought anything of it at the time. But 20 minutes passed, then 30. Someone cracked a joke about her getting lost in the outhouse. Julia walked toward the building, lightly annoyed. The restroom was empty. She checked both stalls. She waited. Then she turned around and walked the perimeter, thinking maybe Lauren had taken a call or gone down to the creek. She wasn't there either. That was the first moment, Julia would later say, when her stomach dropped. Something didn't feel right. She returned to the picnic area, trying to keep her voice calm but asking louder than she meant to. "Has anyone seen Lauren?" No one had, and no one would again. The initial minutes were filled with casual confusion. A few family members walked up and down the main trail. One uncle wandered toward the parking lot thinking maybe she'd gone to the car. A cousin searched the overlook path. By 2:05 p.m., Julia's voice had tightened. Her husband pulled out his phone and dialed 911. Dispatch received the call at 2:07 p.m. and dispatched a ranger from the main gatehouse to respond. Within 30 minutes, 4 rangers were at the site, beginning a grid search of the immediate vicinity. They asked for a photo. They were told Lauren had brown hair, just past her shoulders, hazel eyes, and had been wearing black shorts, a gray t-shirt, and white sneakers. No one saw her leave the trailhead. No cars had driven in or out of the lower loop during the estimated time window. The picnic area was full, 2 other families at adjacent tables, a hiking couple passing through, and a group of teens with hammocks strung across the northern edge. Deputies arrived by 3 p.m. and began interviewing everyone nearby. They flagged any car that attempted to leave the park. Drones were launched. A canine team from the county sheriff's department arrived just before sunset and swept the area around the restrooms and creek. They picked up nothing. No scent trail, no sign of distress, no discarded clothing or belongings. By nightfall, the Kinleys were still at table number 9. No one could leave. Lauren's lemonade cup was still sweating on the wooden bench. Her phone hadn't moved. When powered on, it showed the last activity at 1:13 p.m., a Spotify playlist called Hike Vibes. That detail would haunt her family. She'd queued up music for a walk. Maybe she never made it to the restrooms. Maybe she turned right instead of left. Maybe someone was waiting. What authorities quickly realized was that the time between Lauren being seen and being missed was only about 15 minutes. Within that time, inside a busy public park on a clear day, a 17-year-old girl had vanished completely, without a sound, a struggle, or a clue. Investigators would later call it one of the most baffling disappearances they'd ever seen. It didn't feel like a runaway. It didn't feel like a typical abduction, and nothing they found in those early hours made sense. By midnight, with spotlights and ATVs now joining the search, one ranger quietly remarked to another, "It's like she walked into the woods and never came back." But the truth was far more disturbing, and would take 5 years and a burnt diary to finally be revealed. By the next morning, the search effort had swelled beyond the park's usual resources. More than 30 people, rangers, deputies, volunteer firefighters, and local residents, formed human chains through the tree line surrounding Table Nanakra 9. The air was heavy, not just with humidity, but with something unspoken. Everyone was still working under the assumption that Lauren was out there, lost or injured. But the longer it went, the less sense that theory made. This wasn't an unmarked wilderness zone. It was a regulated picnic area with signage, cell reception, and dozens of people within earshot. Statistically, people don't just vanish in places like that. They're found quickly. But by noon on Sunday, 24 hours after Lauren Kinley was last seen, not a single confirmed clue had emerged, not until the timeline was reconstructed. Detectives started with the basics: who saw Lauren last and exactly when. Family members were re-interviewed and asked to write down their memories in the order they occurred. What emerged was a small but critical detail, a tight window of uncertainty that spanned no more than 10 minutes. Julia Kinley swore she saw Lauren leave the picnic area at 1:15 p.m. sharp, glancing at her watch just as she stood. Kyle, her brother, initially believed it was around 1:30, but adjusted his answer after seeing the timestamp on a photo he took of the creek, which showed Lauren's seat empty by 1:18. The cousins had no firm recollection. Some thought she was still there until 1:20, others weren't sure. But the overlapping testimonies narrowed the mystery down to a 10-minute period, from approximately 1:15 to 1:25 p.m. In that short span, on a clear day, in a park filled with people, Lauren had walked out of view and never came back. Then a ranger mentioned something odd. A couple had passed through the preserve's main trailhead just after 1:30 and flagged him down to report what they described as a sharp scream near the creek. The woman had said it sounded like a girl yelling or messing around, but she didn't think much of it. Her partner agreed. He thought it was a group of kids playing tag. They kept walking. That moment, casually dismissed in real time, now landed directly inside the critical disappearance window. The area they were walking through, just 200 yards downhill from the restrooms, was within shouting distance of where Lauren should have been. Deputies hiked the same path later that afternoon. Nothing stood out, no broken branches, no discarded clothing, no signs of a struggle. If something happened there, it was quick, precise, and silent, except for one scream. By day 2, search teams shifted focus. A K-9 unit was brought in, a German shepherd trained specifically for human scent tracking. He was given access to Lauren's shirt and pillowcase, then released at the last known point, the restrooms. The dog circled aimlessly for several minutes, then zeroed in on a stretch of the ridge trail that led east toward the denser tree line. He followed it for 40 yards, then stopped cold. His handler tried to redirect him, but he refused to move forward. He sat, whined, and wouldn't continue. That spot was flagged and marked. Rangers and deputies combed the surrounding area with rakes and flags. Drones were launched again, but just like the day before, they found nothing. The signal ended there. Lauren's parents began to spiral emotionally. Julia begged the sheriff to bring in the FBI. Tom Kinley lashed out at reporters who had started camping near the ranger station. Online speculation exploded. Was it a kidnapping? Did she run off with someone? Theories multiplied as quickly as they could be disproven. Then, on the morning of July 15th, 2 full days after Lauren vanished, a volunteer from a local hiking club found something just off the creekbed trail. 2 white sneakers side by side resting atop a mossy flat stone. Clean, unscuffed, with the laces tucked inside. They were confirmed within hours to be Lauren's. Her footprints weren't around them. No signs of dragging, no blood, no hair, no DNA. To the trained eye, the placement was deliberate, as if they'd been left there to be discovered. Deputies photographed the scene from every angle. The stone was lifted. Nothing was underneath. The area had been walked over multiple times during the earlier grid search. The shoes hadn't been there before. They had appeared sometime after the second day began, and no one saw who left them. If Lauren had placed them herself, why? If someone else had, what message were they trying to send? Investigators quietly feared the worst. A predator might have known the park's routines, watched long enough to understand patrol gaps, and waited until just the right moment. The absence of struggle, of any scene at all, pointed toward control, calmness. And the calculated return of her shoes suggested the presence of someone who wasn't done yet. But with no physical trail, no eyewitnesses, and no digital pings, the case stalled. And what no one realized at the time, what no one could have guessed, was that somewhere deeper in the preserve, buried beneath layers of ash and brush, a small, scorched book was waiting to be found. A diary. One that would break the silence years later. By the third day, the weight of Lauren Kinley's disappearance had fully settled over Pine Brush. It wasn't just another missing persons case anymore. It was their missing girl. A 17-year-old senior with no criminal record, no drug use, and no history of running away. Her face was suddenly everywhere, printed on flyers, taped to stop signs, shared across Instagram stories, flashing across local news headlines. "Have you seen Lauren?" was printed in bold black letters over her school portrait, smiling, neat, clean-eyed, framed in soft lighting. The kind of image that stops people cold, the kind that made even strangers feel like they should know her. People started showing up in droves, some locals, others from towns as far as 2 hours away, volunteers bringing maps, canteens, dogs, drones, anything they could think of to help. They formed new search lines through the preserve every morning, combing sections that had already been cleared, just in case something had been missed. But no matter how many boots hit the dirt, the result was always the same. Nothing. At night, the Kinleys stopped sleeping. Julia sat in Lauren's bedroom with the door open, as if expecting her daughter to step through it at any moment. Tom spent hours in the garage, chain-smoking next to a stack of flyers he couldn't bring himself to stop printing. Kyle, silent and withdrawn, refused interviews and avoided the growing crowd that camped outside their house. Meanwhile, a candlelight vigil was organized on the front steps of Pine Brush High School. Hundreds attended. Friends, classmates, teachers, and even people who didn't know Lauren directly but knew of her. Julia took the microphone first. Her voice shook. She begged for her daughter's return. She said if anyone had her, to please let her go, no questions asked. She said she knew Lauren wouldn't have run away, that she felt something had happened, that every minute she was gone, they were losing her. The town stood in silence, holding up electric candles, while the local pastor offered a prayer that sounded more like a plea. The sheriff's office remained cautious in its public statements. Captain Dean Marshall told reporters they were pursuing all credible leads and working around the clock. But inside, they were drowning. For every hour that passed without progress, the pressure mounted. People wanted answers, and when official sources went quiet, rumors filled the vacuum. Social media exploded with theories. Someone claimed Lauren had been secretly dating a college student from out of town. Someone else said she'd been spotted hitchhiking north on Route 6 the day after she vanished. A Reddit thread suggested she was recruited into a trafficking ring operating out of Portland. None of it was substantiated, but the stories traveled fast, shared and reshared by people desperate to make sense of the silence. Then came the first real scare. A local man named Curtis Doyle was questioned after multiple people reported seeing him pacing alone through the park's picnic loop around the time Lauren disappeared. Doyle was known to authorities, a Vietnam veteran, unhoused, often seen scavenging recyclables near the river. On the day in question, a park visitor said she saw him standing behind the restrooms, watching people too closely. A composite sketch went out, and within hours, Doyle was picked up near the rail yard and brought in. He had long gray hair, a trembling hand, and no fixed address. But under questioning, he remained calm. He admitted to being at Falls Ridge that day, but said he never left the trail and had seen nothing unusual. He even produced a time-stamped receipt from a nearby gas station dated 1:32 p.m., 7 minutes after Lauren was last seen. Surveillance footage confirmed it. He was ruled out, but the damage had already been done. His name flooded local Facebook groups. People called him a predator. Parents clutched their children closer. A reporter was caught on camera banging on the door of a women's shelter where he sometimes stayed. In the eyes of many, suspicion alone had been enough, and when that lid dissolved, the sense of helplessness doubled. For the Kinleys, it felt like time was folding in on itself. Days passed without developments. Tips dried up. Investigators quietly returned to square one. And beneath the surface, grief was beginning to turn into something darker: obsession, paranoia, even resentment. Tom Kinley began calling the sheriff's office daily, then multiple times a day. He kept a notebook tracking every call, every media mention, and every volunteer's account, trying to piece together a narrative from fragments. Julia stopped answering the phone altogether, unless it was from an unknown number, hoping, always hoping, that one day it would be her. But it never was. The search parties thinned, reporters moved on, and the once vibrant community effort dulled into quiet resignation. The sheriff gave one final press conference at the end of August, saying they were not giving up, but that, at this time, there is no evidence of foul play. And just like that, the energy shifted. Lauren Kinley's disappearance faded from the public spotlight, leaving behind unanswered questions and hollow condolences. But for those closest to her, the silence only amplified the noise inside, because someone had to know something. People don't just disappear without help. Someone was watching. Someone was waiting. And somewhere out there, a piece of Lauren was still trying to be found. Long before Lauren Kinley disappeared, Falls Ridge Preserve had quietly earned a reputation among Pine Brush locals, one they rarely voiced outside their own circles. They called it the Dark Current, a strange undertow of bad luck whispered about after dusk but dismissed during daylight. The park was beautiful on the surface, towering Douglas firs, clean creeks, and manicured trails. But for decades, odd stories had clung to it. People spoke of hikers losing time, compasses spinning, kids wandering too far from camp and turning up miles away with no memory of how they got there. No pattern, no proof. Just a low hum of unease passed down like folklore. For a long time, no one looked too closely, not until Lauren vanished. In early August, just 3 weeks after the search effort began to slow, retired Ranger Jim Matheson stepped forward. He'd worked at Falls Ridge from 1987 to 2005 and knew every path and every seasonal rhythm. He told detectives he couldn't shake the feeling that Lauren's case mirrored something from his early years, a missing child report from 1992. The boy, 7 years old, had been with a church group on a supervised nature walk. He wandered ahead on the creek trail and never returned. His body was never recovered. The case had quietly faded from public memory after initial searches turned up nothing. Matheson said it haunted him for years, and now, with Lauren's disappearance happening just a few hundred yards from that same stretch of trail, he couldn't ignore the parallels. Detectives began to pull records. It turned out there had been more than a dozen reports filed over the past 30 years, involving strange events at Falls Ridge: missing time, unexplained injuries, disoriented hikers, and 2 other cold cases, including one involving a woman whose car was found in the upper lot, but who was never seen on the trail. There had never been enough of a link to raise alarm, but when charted on a map, nearly every report clustered around the same 3-mile radius between the picnic loop, the Ridge Trail, and the old ranger station. Investigators started asking a different question. Was someone using the familiarity of the park to exploit its blind spots? One ranger pointed out that there were dozens of unmapped footpaths, old fire access roads, animal trails, and unofficial shortcuts made over the years by repeat visitors. A person who knew the terrain intimately could vanish and reappear without ever crossing a camera or trail marker. That detail shifted the profile. Lauren's disappearance wasn't looking like a random snatch and grab. It might have been calculated, local, familiar. The idea chilled the task force. Around the same time, a quiet anomaly emerged from the digital forensics team. Lauren's phone had been recovered at table number 9 on the day she vanished, untouched, unpowered, battery at 76%. Her last known action was playing music at 1:13 p.m., but when investigators pulled tower data to verify timestamps, something didn't match. At 1:19 p.m., 4 minutes after she walked away from the picnic, 3 outgoing text messages and 1 attempted call were logged from Lauren's number, pinging a different cell tower 5 miles north of the preserve. That tower didn't cover table number 9. It served the opposite side of the ridge. The texts never reached their destination. All 3 were blank, no body content, just failed transmissions to her mother, her brother, and a contact listed only as Anna, school. The call was made to her own voicemail, all within 90 seconds. Then silence. The signal stopped completely at 1:21 p.m. The device itself, however, was confirmed to have remained in her drawstring bag next to the picnic table. No data movement, no app activity, no location shift. The tower ping suggested otherwise. It didn't make sense. The sheriff's office brought in a third-party digital consultant to reanalyze the phone. They confirmed the tower pings were real. The call and text logs were authentic. Somehow, Lauren's number had communicated from 2 places at once. Either her SIM card had been cloned, or the phone that pinged the northern tower wasn't her device. A second phone using her credentials. The implications were enormous. Someone may have had access to Lauren's private accounts. Someone may have spoofed her phone activity to manipulate the timeline. Or, worse, it meant Lauren might have been alive for a few minutes longer than anyone thought, somewhere else entirely, trying to reach out, and no one picked up. The case file expanded again. Digital fraud, cellular spoofing, remote. Tracking terms that hadn't been part of the early search efforts now became central. Investigators scoured park records, looking for any prior reports of strange pings or signal loss. They found 2. Both were dismissed at the time as system glitches. Both occurred within the same month, July. Both near the ridge. The theory took root. Someone was using digital misdirection to obfuscate real movements inside the preserve. But who would go to such lengths? Why here? And why, Lauren? It had been less than a month, but it already felt like a year. Leads came and went, theories rose and fell. But underneath it all, one truth remained. The park wasn't just a setting. It was part of the story. Its history wasn't just background, it was evidence. And somewhere, buried beneath the layers of missing files and fragmented pings, was a pattern waiting to be seen. But it would take another year and another chilling discovery before anyone would come close. The summer of 2021 had come with record drought. The riverbeds around Falls Ridge had withered into cracked basins of clay and stone, revealing parts of the forest that hadn't been visible in years. With wildfire risk high, rangers discouraged off-trail exploration, but that didn't stop everyone. One of them was Dennis Albright, a 42-year-old school janitor from Eugene who had taken up solo hiking during the pandemic. On July 17th, exactly 2 years and 4 days after Lauren Kinley vanished, Dennis was walking along a section of dried creek bed northeast of the main picnic area. He wasn't searching for anything specific, just following the erosion lines where water used to flow, when he noticed something strange wedged between 2 rocks. It was thin, curved, pale, and about the size of a pencil. He took a photo and left it in place, returning home that evening and sending the image to a friend who taught biology. That friend called him back immediately. He said it looked like a rib, possibly human. Dennis reported the finding to the sheriff's office the next morning. Detectives and forensic specialists returned to the spot with gloves, sieves, and portable scanners. The object was recovered and sent to the state crime lab for testing. For several days, rumors swirled that this might finally be Lauren. Her family waited in silence. But when the report came back, the news was anticlimactic. The bone fragment was determined to be from a mule deer, old, weathered, and completely unrelated. No human remains were found in the surrounding soil, just another lead that fizzled out. But the site itself wasn't dismissed. Less than 20 feet from the bone, officers noted an unusual patch of disturbed earth tucked beneath a moss-covered outcrop. The ground was blackened as if scorched long ago and scattered with what looked like melted plastic and warped metal shards. At first glance, it appeared to be remnants from a long-extinguished campfire. But as they cleared the debris, something caught the light, small, oval-shaped, and fused to the edge of a melted mass. It was gold, and etched faintly into its surface was the letter L. The item was extracted and rushed to the crime lab. It had suffered extreme heat exposure, enough to partially collapse its structure and erase much of its finish. But forensic metallurgists were able to reconstruct a portion of its design. It had once been a pendant, likely attached to a thin chain. The melted mass included traces of clasp metal and nylon, consistent with synthetic cord or thread. The engraving on the back, almost illegible to the naked eye, read, "To L, love always, Nana." Julia Kinley collapsed when detectives showed her the photo. That necklace had belonged to Lauren. It had been a gift on her 16th birthday, but the family believed she'd stopped wearing it months before the picnic. They hadn't seen it in over a year. Julia swore her daughter hadn't been wearing it the day she disappeared, but now they weren't sure. And if she had worn it, if that necklace had gone into the forest with her, it meant she had made it farther than anyone originally thought. Investigators cordoned off the area and began treating it as an active forensic site. Soil samples were taken. A ground-penetrating radar unit was brought in to scan beneath the creek bed. They found no graves, no body parts, no bones. But what they did find painted a chilling picture. In addition to the necklace, there were traces of scorched fabric, burnt synthetic rubber, and what appeared to be the melted sole of a shoe, small enough to match Lauren's known size. All of it blackened, partially buried and decaying under years of moss and silt. The fire pit itself had likely been used only once, based on the burn radius and heat signatures. No ashes remained, but someone had been there, and someone had tried to erase something. When the site report was submitted, the lead investigator noted the location's proximity to a discontinued footpath, one not on the official park maps, but visible if you knew where to look. It veered off from the northern trail just past marker 17, cutting diagonally toward a steep decline that ended in the same dried creek bed. Locals rarely used it. It was dangerous, poorly maintained, and overgrown. But it connected, in theory, to an old ranger station that had been decommissioned in 2006. The building was locked, abandoned, forgotten. Detectives took note but didn't act immediately. The discovery of the necklace reignited public interest. Media outlets picked the story back up. Online communities revisited old theories. Julia and Tom Kinley appeared in a brief news segment, pleading once again for anyone who might know something to come forward. The fire pit became a marker in the case, something real, tangible, something burnt. For the first time in 2 years, there was physical evidence that Lauren had likely been moved, or taken, farther into the preserve. But the biggest question still loomed. Why had the fire pit been so carefully hidden? And who would go to the effort of destroying her belongings unless they had something much larger to hide? The area was closed off to the public. A chain-link barrier was installed at the creek bed access point, but the sense of intrusion lingered. Falls Ridge no longer felt like a park. It felt like a sealed memory that someone had tried to incinerate, and just when it seemed like the clues had stopped again, something else was uncovered, miles away, buried in charred remains of its own. A second fire, a second attempt to erase, but this time something had survived the flames. A diary, pages intact, ink barely legible, but enough to reveal that Lauren hadn't vanished without a voice. She had tried to speak, and someone had tried to silence her. For nearly 3 years, Kyle Kinley said almost nothing. In the hours following Lauren's disappearance, he gave a short, carefully worded statement to police, saying his sister had told him she was going to the restroom, and he hadn't seen her after that. He never spoke to the media, never joined his parents at vigils, and never publicly addressed the speculation online. At first, most people gave him the benefit of the doubt, Grief affects everyone differently, and Lauren's disappearance had fractured the entire family. But as time wore on and the silence stretched thin, questions began to build, slowly, quietly, under the surface. Why hadn't Kyle ever given a follow-up interview? Why hadn't he taken part in the second round of search efforts? And why, even in private, did he seem so emotionally detached from the case? In early 2022, those questions exploded back into the spotlight when Kyle was arrested outside a bar in downtown Eugene for aggravated assault. According to police reports, he had gotten into a violent altercation with a man who allegedly made an offhand comment about that missing girl case. The man suffered a broken jaw. Kyle was taken into custody and charged with felony battery. His mugshot was plastered across local news, eyes bloodshot, expression flat, wearing the same hoodie he'd been seen in years earlier. For the first time since the search began, Lauren's case returned to headlines, but this time with Kyle in the center. The public reaction was immediate and divided. Some believed the pressure of the past few years had finally cracked him. Others saw it differently, that maybe from the very beginning, Kyle had been carrying a truth no one else knew. During booking, Kyle reportedly grew agitated when detectives revisited Lauren's timeline. When asked again about the last time he saw her, his answers started to shift. Then, in a follow-up interview at the jail, this time without his parents or a lawyer present, he finally gave up something different. He admitted that he and Lauren had argued the morning she disappeared. Not just a normal sibling disagreement, but a real confrontation, one that had been simmering for weeks. Kyle told detectives Lauren had been messaging someone online, someone she never named, and he believed she was planning to meet them in secret that day. He had confronted her about it in the car on the way to the picnic, then again privately near the tree line before she walked off. He said she snapped, told him to stay out of her life, and walked away with purpose. He thought she was bluffing. He didn't think she'd actually meet anyone. But now he wasn't sure. This new information, while vague, was the first personal clue in years that pointed away from random abduction and toward a premeditated meeting. Investigators reopened the digital forensics angle. Lauren's phone had never shown any texts or app messages to unknown contacts in the weeks leading up to her disappearance, but that didn't rule out secondary devices. Kyle believed she might have used a school-issued Chromebook or borrowed a friend's phone, possibly to message someone she didn't want her parents to know about. Detectives pulled school computer logs and searched IP histories. Nothing concrete emerged, but a pattern began to take shape. Lauren had been increasingly secretive in the weeks before she vanished. Teachers described her as distracted. Friends recalled her canceling weekend plans without reason. Her journals, those still in the family home, contained vague references to getting out and a new chance, phrases that felt harmless before but now carried new weight. The theory shifted again. If Lauren had planned to meet someone in the park that day, that person might have had knowledge of the layout, someone who knew the blind spots, the unpatrolled areas, and the timing between ranger rounds. This wasn't just about who she trusted. It was about how that trust was used. Kyle's confession didn't implicate him directly, but it reopened a door investigators had almost sealed shut, the possibility that Lauren hadn't been taken by a stranger, but by someone she thought she knew. Someone who had been grooming her attention, someone who had given her a reason to separate from the group, and someone who had the resources or the proximity to vanish with her in broad daylight. The fire pit, the necklace, the digital anomalies, they all seemed to point to planning. Not chaos, not chance. Kyle was released on bond and never formally charged in connection with Lauren's disappearance, but the damage was done. His relationship with his parents deteriorated. Julia reportedly refused to speak to him for weeks, believing he had withheld something vital all these years. Tom defended him publicly, but admitted privately that he didn't know what to believe anymore. The family unit fractured in quiet, permanent ways, and beneath it all, the one detail that continued to haunt investigators was the timing. If Lauren really had gone to meet someone that day, that meant her. Disappearance wasn't entirely random. It was orchestrated, and someone had been waiting. But if that person truly existed, if Lauren had reached out to them in secret, they had managed to leave behind almost no trace. Almost. Because in early 2024, near the base of an old stone fire pit not far from table number 9, a new clue would surface. One that carried Lauren's own words, words no one was ever meant to find, burnt, buried, but not destroyed. The discovery of the ranger cabin should have been impossible. By 2023, no official maps of Falls Ridge Preserve marked its location. Most rangers under the age of 30 didn't even know it existed. It had been decommissioned in the early 2000s, boarded up, and left to rot behind a wall of dense thicket and deadfall that hadn't been cleared in decades. The trail leading to it had eroded into little more than a suggestion, visible only to those who knew where to look. But a small group of volunteer searchers, part of an online forum still devoted to Lauren Kinley's case, had heard whispers of its location from old logging records and forestry maps. On May 6, 2023, after months of speculation, they found it. The building was more intact than anyone expected. The door hung crooked, but wasn't locked. Inside, the air was damp with rot. Old ranger gear, broken lanterns, rusted nails, a frayed cot littered the floor. Animals had clearly been inside. Claw marks streaked the lower walls, but in the rear corner, near the threshold of what used to be a broom closet, something unexpected stood out. Scratched faintly into the doorframe were the initials LK. They were thin, shallow, almost invisible, but below them, in numbers etched just as lightly, was a date. August 19th. The volunteers froze. They took photos, backed away, and called the county sheriff's office immediately. By the next morning, the site had been sealed off. Detectives, crime scene techs, and a forensic anthropologist arrived in convoy. Everything inside was cataloged: dust samples, spider webs, animal scat, floor debris, each piece examined as if it held the missing link. The initials were real, carved with a blade or key, likely years ago. The numbers matched the format Lauren used in her journals. Investigators couldn't confirm she carved them, but the coincidence was too glaring to ignore. Then came something darker. When removing warped boards near the closet threshold, one detective noticed discoloration, deep reddish stains along the subfloor. The wood was lifted. Beneath it, hardened earth revealed a dried, dark patch. Field testing suggested blood. Samples were taken. Days passed. The results came back inconclusive. The DNA was too degraded for a full profile, but it bore markers consistent with human origin. The soil beneath had trace hemoglobin. It wasn't definitive, but it wasn't dismissed. Suddenly, the story shifted again. Lauren hadn't just disappeared. She may have been kept. The implications. Shattered old assumptions. Up until this point, most working theories assumed that whatever had happened to Lauren occurred quickly, within that first hour, possibly in the wooded area near the ridge or the creek. But this changed the timeline entirely. The cabin was nearly 2 miles from where she was last seen. Across terrain no casual visitor would know how to navigate. It wasn't reachable by accident. Someone had led her there, or forced her. With the new evidence, detectives mapped out the route from the fire pit where Lauren's burnt necklace had been found in 2021 to the cabin discovered in 2023. Though separated by elevation and thick brush, it was technically walkable, especially for someone who knew the old fire roads and backwoods shortcuts. It took a team of searchers over an hour to cross it in daylight. In darkness, or while avoiding detection, it could have taken much longer. But it was possible. The path even intersected briefly with a logging access point near a utility gate, one rarely patrolled and unmonitored in 2019. Theories bloomed. Investigators began quietly revisiting names from the original volunteer registry. Dozens of seasonal workers, forestry interns, and park volunteers from 2017 through 2019 had come and gone. A few had minor infractions, trespassing, petty theft, but no one with a violent record. Still, proximity mattered now. Detectives focused on anyone with knowledge of unmapped cabins, old ranger structures, or maintenance-only trails. Nothing definitive emerged, but one name, a former forestry student who had volunteered briefly in the summer of 2019. reappeared in several maintenance logs. He had since moved out of state. No formal charges were brought, but his file was flagged for future reference, quietly, carefully. The investigation was evolving, but not publicly. The media, however, surged forward. Local stations ran nightly segments. Headlines screamed about the cabin of secrets. True crime podcasts dissected the floorboard stain, the initials, and the etched date. Online sleuths mapped every cabin on record in the county. Even national news picked up the story again. The attention brought renewed interest, but also complications. Julia Kinley refused interviews. Tom gave one, visibly hollowed, saying only that they hadn't given up, not once. Kyle, now mostly estranged from the family, declined comment altogether. But the public attention created something else. New leads. One came from a former ranger, retired in 2008, who contacted authorities after watching a televised segment. He remembered the cabin, remembered it being used for temporary storage. But more importantly, he remembered it being briefly squatted in the early 2000s and 10s. At the time, they assumed it was a transient. Some belongings were found, blankets, a backpack, a few canned goods, nothing threatening. But after that, the door had been padlocked. He said he always thought it was strange that the padlock vanished shortly after he left the service. Someone, he said, had clearly reopened the cabin without permission. No fingerprints had been found in 2023. No personal items. Whoever used the cabin had either cleaned up or left nothing behind. But Lauren's initials remained, and beneath them, the most haunting possibility to date. She may have lived in that cabin, not in freedom, not by choice, but long enough to carve her name and mark the time. If that date was accurate, August 19th, that meant Lauren survived for more than a month after she disappeared. That meant someone kept her hidden, possibly fed her, possibly watched her, possibly controlled her every move. And then, just like the necklace in the fire pit, it meant someone came back to erase her. But one item would resist destruction. Months later, as seasonal burn prevention teams cleared old fire debris around table number 9, another fire pit, smaller, deeper, was unearthed. Inside, half encased in melted nylon and soot, was a compact cloth bundle. Inside the bundle, scorched paper, browned at the edges, but legible. The handwriting was unmistakable. Block letters, slight slant. Panic in the loops. It was Lauren, and she had been writing things no one was ever meant to read. The discovery wasn't part of any renewed investigation or targeted search effort. It happened during something routine. Boring, even. On February 14, 2024, a seasonal fire prevention technician named Maddie Rowe was clearing brush near the lower picnic loop of Falls Ridge Preserve. It had been a dry winter, and the department were doing early inspections ahead of what they expected to be another bad wildfire season. As part of protocol, Maddie was tasked with removing debris from the older fire pits, scattered shallow depressions carved into the earth around frequently used areas like table number 9. Most of them contained charred wood, rusted cans, or melted plastic from cookouts long past. But one pit was different. Beneath the ash and stone, she found a compact, blackened bundle wrapped in what looked like a heat-sealed nylon strap, partially melted and fused to the dirt. It didn't belong. She radioed it in. Within 24 hours, the bundle was delivered to the county evidence lab. The outer casing was carefully peeled apart under forensic supervision. Inside was a journal, warped from heat, pages curled and singed around the edges, but still intact in the center. A forensic document specialist began cataloging the contents, one page at a time, using magnification and light filtration to preserve the ink. The entries weren't dated, but the handwriting was tight, panicked, and unmistakably adolescent. Investigators compared it to samples from Lauren Kinley's schoolwork and personal notebooks. The match was confirmed. What they were holding, somehow protected through fire and time, was Lauren's voice. The journal didn't read like a diary. It was more like a log, short entries, fragments of thought, and phrases that repeated, skipped, then returned. Some were angry, others were terrified. A few pages were entirely blank, save for a single word written over and over in the corners. Wait. The first legible line read simply, "He said I can leave when I stop asking." Another, I tried to count the days, but I lost track. And then later, the woods are too quiet when he's here, like the trees are listening. The most alarming line appeared roughly halfway through the preserved pages. He only comes when the fire's out. For investigators, the implications were immediate and horrifying. If Lauren had written this journal, if these entries were hers, composed in hiding while she was still alive, it confirmed what had only been theory until now. She had been held captive, possibly nearby, possibly in intervals. Someone had taken her, moved her, and isolated her so completely that her only outlet was to write into a notebook she likely knew no one would ever find. The sentence about the fire suggested something even worse, that she had created fire as a form of light or signal, and the person controlling her punished her for it. The psychology embedded in the phrasing was chilling. This wasn't spontaneous violence. It was control, routine, behavior. Further pages detailed movements, hushed footsteps on gravel, the sound of water at night, and once, an unfamiliar truck engine. She described food that came cold, a blanket with holes, and once noted, "He watches through the wall." I know because I hear him breathe. Investigators began cross-referencing the journal's contents with known locations near the lower picnic loop. Several entries referenced a ridge, a fallen tree shaped like a V, and something called the box house. Detectives theorized this may refer to the old ranger cabin, which had already been searched the year prior. They revisited the site, this time with fresh emphasis on the surrounding area, looking not just for structures, but for observation points, crawl spaces, or hidden compartments. Nothing new was found, but the journal itself had already confirmed something else. Lauren had still been alive after the Firepit necklace discovery, long enough to write, long enough to fear, long enough to run out of time. The last complete page of the journal was dated only by a crude drawing, what looked like a sun half submerged beneath a line. Below it, written in smaller letters than before, was a sentence that would haunt the case file forever. If someone finds this, it means I didn't make it out. That entry was the final coherent message. The remaining pages were badly damaged, ink smeared, scorched, and in some places completely erased by heat. But the forensic team was able to recover partial words like buried, watching, and smoke. There was no map, no name, no clear location of where she'd been kept or where she died. But there was now undeniable evidence that Lauren had survived for an extended period after her disappearance, and that she had been trying, in whatever way she could, to leave behind something that told the truth. Public release of the journal was limited. The Kinley family was given access to a redacted transcript. Julia reportedly read it alone. Tom couldn't finish. Kyle hasn't spoken about it publicly, but internally, the sheriff's office initiated a full cold case review based on the new evidence. The fire pit's placement was examined against previous patrol schedules. A theory developed that the journal may not have been burnt immediately after it was written. It could have been kept for months or even years before someone attempted to destroy it, which raised the most unsettling question of all. Who had possession of it during that time? And why did they choose to bury it right back where everything began? The journal shifted the tone of the investigation permanently. No longer a case of disappearance or even suspected homicide, it was now a proven abduction, prolonged captivity, and intentional concealment. The perpetrator, whoever they were, had left Lauren just enough room to leave behind her story. And that story had endured, charred, warped, but still speaking, still warning, still waiting to be fully understood. In the months following the discovery of the burnt diary, forensic analysis began to peel back layers of the mystery that had long confounded investigators. Handwriting experts confirmed with near certainty that the journal's entries were penned by Lauren Kinley herself. The unique slant, the pressure of the strokes, the rhythm of her script, it all matched samples recovered from her school assignments and personal notes. But it wasn't just the handwriting that connected the diary to Lauren. Forensic scientists dated the soot and ash embedded within the pages to late 2019, mere months after her disappearance. This placed the diary's burning not as a recent event, but as something deliberate and immediate, an attempt to erase evidence shortly after she vanished. Detectives knew that if the diary was burnt so close to the time Lauren disappeared, whoever had it was likely involved in the initial abduction or concealment. This realization shifted the focus of the investigation sharply. A key question arose. Who had the means and opportunity to hold Lauren captive, to control her movements, and ultimately to attempt to destroy her voice? To find that answer, law enforcement began combing through maintenance and volunteer records connected to Falls Ridge Preserve, searching for anyone with access to the off-grid cabins, including the now infamous abandoned ranger station discovered in 2023. One name kept recurring: Martin Hale. A longtime volunteer and caretaker of several remote park properties, Hale was known to many locals as a quiet, reclusive man with a deep knowledge of the forest. He had been working unofficially at Falls Ridge since the early 1990s and held keys to several cabins that weren't open to the public. His presence was mostly benign, or so everyone had believed. Hale died in a single car accident in late 2022, and because of the accident's nature and his status as a volunteer rather than a paid employee, he was never formally questioned during the active years of Lauren's disappearance. With his passing, investigators obtained warrants to search Hale's properties and possessions. Among his belongings, they found multiple keys, maps of off-trail routes, and notebooks filled with cryptic observations about the forest and its visitors. The most damning discovery came during a search of one of Hale's cabins deep in the woods, miles from the main trails. Underneath a loose floorboard in a sub-basement concealed by decades of dust and cobwebs, officers found strands of hair and scraps of fabric. The hair samples were sent immediately for DNA analysis and matched partially to Lauren, suggesting they had been in close contact. Nearby, the remains of a small incinerator, long since cooled, were found, with traces of burnt materials that forensic experts believed could have been clothing or paper documents. The connection was chilling. The cabin itself was a grim monument to secrecy. Walls bore faint scratch marks, and the air smelt faintly of decay and smoke. Investigators hypothesized that Lauren may have been held captive there, briefly or intermittently, her movements controlled within the confines of this hidden space. It wasn't just a shelter, it was a prison. The presence of the incinerator hinted at attempts to destroy evidence, possibly including Lauren's writings and belongings. The fact that Hale's belongings contained so many items connected to Lauren suggested he had a direct role in her captivity, or at least in the concealment of her existence. Detectives delved deeper into Hale's background. Despite being a known figure in the forest community, few had truly understood his private life. He was unmarried, had no close family, and kept his personal affairs tightly guarded. Some recalled his erratic behavior, periods of isolation punctuated by bursts of intense work on trail maintenance or cabin repairs. A few neighbors remembered hearing strange noises late at night near the cabins, but dismissed them as wildlife. There were no previous allegations or reports linking Hale to violent crime or missing persons, but hindsight revealed a dangerous blind spot: his proximity to the preserve's darkest secrets. The investigation uncovered maintenance logs showing Hale had regular access to the ranger cabins throughout 2019, including dates shortly before and after Lauren's disappearance. Security footage from park entrances, though limited, placed him in the area on multiple occasions. Despite this, no one had ever connected him to the case until the diary's discovery reignited interest. The fact that Hale died before he could be questioned left many unanswered questions. Had he been planning to come forward? Was the crash an accident or something else? Public reaction was immediate and intense. News outlets splashed headlines about the Watcher of Falls Ridge, portraying Hale as the sinister figure lurking in the shadows of the forest. Friends and former colleagues expressed shock, insisting they never suspected such darkness. The Kinley family faced the crushing reality that the person who may have held Lauren captive was gone, unable to answer for his actions. Yet, the physical evidence from Hale's cabin reignited hope among investigators that they were closing in on the truth. Despite the grim findings, detectives pressed on, combing through Hale's digital footprints, phone records, and financial transactions. They sought accomplices, unexplained trips, or any indication someone else had been involved. They expanded their search around the off-grid properties Hale managed, looking for additional clues, undiscovered fire pits, or hidden caches. Each lead deepened the complexity of the case, revealing how someone had used the wilderness not just as a refuge, but as a carefully maintained prison. The uncovering of the hidden sub-basement, the hair, the incinerator, and the burnt diary combined to tell a horrifying story. One of captivity, control, and desperate attempts to erase a life. Lauren Kinley had been trapped in the woods, watched by someone who knew every secret path and every dark corner. Martin Hale, once a trusted volunteer and steward of the forest, had become the unmasked watcher. And though he could no longer speak, his actions left a chilling testament. Some of the darkest horrors hide behind the most familiar faces. The forest kept its secrets well, but it could not hide the truth forever. The discovery of the dental fragments in Martin Hale's burn barrel was the grim, definitive piece of the puzzle that law enforcement had been searching for since Lauren Kinley's disappearance nearly 5 years earlier. Found during the meticulous excavation of Hale's property in the spring of 2024, the fragments were carefully collected, sealed, and sent to the state's forensic odontology lab. The lab worked with painstaking precision, comparing the recovered teeth against Lauren's dental records on file from her childhood dentist. The results were chilling, a near-perfect match. This confirmation brought with it a harsh finality. The young girl who vanished from a picnic table in Falls Ridge Preserve had died in those woods, her remains hidden and partially destroyed by fire in the remote cabin of the man now identified as her captor. For investigators, this was the closure that years of dead ends and silent hope had refused to grant. In the same period, forensic specialists supplied advanced imaging technology to the scorched diary discovered in the fire pit near table number 9, where Lauren had last been seen alive. The pages, fragile and curled, were scanned under ultraviolet and infrared light, revealing ink that was invisible to the naked eye and restoring words that had been almost obliterated by heat and time. What emerged was a haunting narrative of survival, terror, and defiance. The entries painted a picture of a girl who had endured captivity, attempted escape, and endured the crushing despair of recapture. She wrote about slipping away one night, under the cover of darkness, moving swiftly through the forest while the stars hid behind a veil of clouds. But hope was fleeting. A subsequent entry detailed her recapture, the cold grip of hands pulling her back, the heavy silence of being trapped once more. The tone of the diary darkened as the pages progressed. Words grew hurried, with letters uneven and ink smudged, as Lauren chronicled the slow erosion of her spirit. She spoke of being watched constantly, of the oppressive quiet that fell whenever her captor was near. She wrote of small acts of rebellion, hiding scraps of food, tracing shapes in the dirt, and of her desperate desire to be found, to be remembered, to be freed. The chilling line, "He only comes when the fire's out," echoed through the pages like a warning, a message embedded with fear and coded meaning that had puzzled investigators for years. It was a phrase that captured the terrifying rhythms of her captivity, the moments when the flame of hope flickered but was snuffed out. The final entry was a heartbreaking testament to a fading will. Lauren wrote of feeling trapped not just physically, but inside her own mind, the endless waiting, the growing loneliness, the nightmares of being forgotten. She expressed a desperate hope that if anyone ever found her words, they would know she fought until the very end. The handwriting stopped abruptly. The ink smudged and faded beyond recognition on the final page, leaving the last moments of her ordeal forever lost to time. Yet, those pages were enough, a voice from the past that told the truth in raw, painful detail. The Kinley family was informed of these developments privately, away from the relentless glare of public scrutiny. Julia and Tom Kinley received the dental report and excerpts from the diary in a confidential meeting with the lead detective and forensic experts. The emotional toll was immediate and overwhelming. Julia was said to have collapsed into a chair, clutching the diary pages as if they were a lifeline. Tom remained stoic, but was visibly shaken, his eyes betraying a grief that words could not capture. Kyle, estranged and withdrawn for years, declined to participate. For the family, the confirmation of Lauren's death was a devastating closure that brought both relief and a new wave of sorrow. Years of hoping for her return had come to an irrevocable end. The sheriff's office issued a formal statement announcing the closure of the Lauren Kinley case. The tone was measured, acknowledging the painstaking work of law enforcement, forensic teams, and volunteers who had kept the case alive through the years. The statement explained that the dental fragments and diary entries provided conclusive evidence of Lauren's death and detailed the chain of events uncovered during the investigation. It also made clear that, with the primary suspect deceased and no new leads, the case was now closed from a legal perspective. However, the office emphasized that Lauren's story would not be forgotten and that the community's commitment to her memory remained strong. The site where Lauren's diary had been discovered, the Firepit near table number 9, became a place of quiet reflection and memorialization. Visitors to Falls Ridge Preserve began leaving flowers, candles, and handwritten notes at the edge of the clearing. Park rangers discreetly placed a modest plaque nearby, commemorating Lauren's life and serving as a reminder of the fragility of safety, even in the most serene of places. The Firepit, once an unremarkable scar on the earth, transformed into a shrine of remembrance and mourning. It drew families, hikers, and those touched by the case, each paying homage to a life cut tragically short. In Pine Brush and beyond, Lauren's disappearance and the subsequent revelations sparked conversations about the dangers lurking in familiar places, the resilience of victims, and the importance of listening to the silenced. Her story became emblematic of a broader struggle, the fight for justice in the face of overwhelming odds and the necessity of hope even when the light seems to fade. Community groups dedicated themselves to awareness campaigns, supporting missing persons organizations, and advocating for improved safety measures in public parks and wilderness areas. Though the legal investigation had ended, Lauren's story continued to resonate. Her words, preserved through fire and time, offered a voice to those who had suffered in silence. Her parents, carrying the weight of loss, spoke in private forums and closed gatherings about the need to remember not just the tragedy, but the person, the vibrant, curious, and brave girl who had been taken too soon. They implored others to hold their loved ones close and to fight for truth, no matter how long it takes. The forest itself, once a silent witness to unspeakable horrors, now bore the mark of Lauren's memory. Visitors tread more carefully, aware that beneath the beauty and stillness lies a story of pain and endurance. The preserve's trails, picnic tables, and fire pits had become sacred ground. And while Lauren Kinley's life had been extinguished in that remote wilderness, what remained was a testament to survival, not of the body, but of the spirit. Her diary, her initials carved into a forgotten cabin, and the fragments of her existence discovered on the forest floor all spoke of a young woman who faced unimaginable darkness with courage. And, in remembering her, the community vowed never to forget the lessons her story taught about vigilance, compassion, and the enduring quest for justice. As the years passed, the case of Lauren Kinley transformed from a mystery to a memorial. The pain of loss was tempered by the power of remembrance. The fire pit near table number 9 remained a quiet sanctuary, a place where the light flickered softly in the night, and the whispers of the forest carried the story of a girl who vanished, but whose spirit, etched into the heart of the woods, would never fade away.